Well, welcome everyone. I'm Tristan Noyes, Executive Director of the Maine Grain Alliance, and we're thrilled to have you join us for our second Organic Grain Expert Office Hour. We are very pleased to have a series of these office hours over the course of this year that will help to address any questions folks have on a whole range of different topics. Today, we're going to learn about certification of organic grains and considerations around or growing organically grains. But we also will hear from perspectives from bakers, from brewers, from maltsters. We'll kind of dive into the marketing of grain-based products. We'll look at value-added production and a whole host of other things over the course of the year. Uh, I am really excited to introduce Benjamin Clark, who is going to kick us off with a, um, an overview of considerations that MOFGA has with regard to organic grains. And as a small organic farm in northern Maine that grows grains, I know that this is something that I certainly wish I had when I first started growing, was to have a little bit more understanding of these types of considerations. What we'll do is we'll let Benjamin kind of lead us through this conversation. If folks have any questions, we'll wait till he's done, and or feel free to sort of pipe in if there's a chance. And then for those who can't make it today, we'll share this video and post it to our website for later viewing. So with that, Benjamin, take it away.
Thank you, Tristan. Yeah, so I am Benjamin. I am a staff inspector for MOFGA certification, and my role is to actually perform our annual inspection service. So I visit farms all over Maine and uh, complete a review of their system that gets put into a report and then sent to a specialist on our team, two of which are on the call with us today. Julie and Laura are both here. Um, and our specialists review this inspection report, sign off on it, and farms become certified for that year and continuing. And so essentially, the process of maintaining and achieving certification is like pretty much what we're here to sort of demystify and help people who want their crops to become certified to just give you guys some resources and then also just like some insights into what that looks like on a grain operation. So my experience with organic farming and grain farming is somewhat I wouldn't say I'm an expert per se, but I have taken a grain farm apprenticeship program that I graduated from and then worked on a 13,000 acre organic grain farm out in the plains of Montana. I stayed on and worked at that operation for 4 years as their farm mechanic. Primarily, my job was to fix equipment and to manage grain handling operations. So, when it comes to, taking a crop from seed to harvest to storage and to sale, I've, played a part in each one of those links along the chain. So, um, the first thing I want to just highlight is that anyone who is interested in participating in certification, MOFGA is going to be hosting in-person application workshops. So there's going to be one in Unity on Wednesday, April 15th from 9 to 3. You're welcome to come. This is our main office, and we will be there with laptops and staff. And we'll be there to answer questions and to actually help walk you through the application process. Um, there's a link here in this slideshow that I'm sharing for people who are interested. And then additionally, there's going to be a second in-person application workshop up in northern Aroostook County. Um, Julie, do you want to share the date for that?
Sure, it's actually going to be in Southern Aroostook in Holton at the Southern Aroostook Soil and Water Conservation District office on April 21st from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. and we'd love to have you come in and talk about certification.
And this is like a really great opportunity just to like have all your questions answered in person and to actually have someone sort of hold your hand and walk you through the application process so that, that can happen really quickly and efficiently. So just wanted to throw that out there. MCS is hosting 2 in-person application workshops, and we're super happy to help you through any and all of your questions. So the first thing, obviously, when it comes to organic is like, what is it? How is it different? And essentially what it boils down to is that organic products are grown, raised without synthetic fertilizers or pesticides or GMOs or artificial additives. So, um, you know, in the late 90s, they finally got together and published a, federal regulation that mandated what was and what is not organic. And those standards are sort of what the certifying agencies such as MOFGA um, verify on your farm each year. So for a grain farmer, what this might look like is we're looking at using green manures as opposed to synthetic fertilizers. We're looking at animal manures, and we're looking at practicing agriculture with sort of a holistic and ecological framework. And what that means is that instead of synthetics and instead of those, very resource intensive input based agricultural systems, organic farms are growing crops, looking to, soil health, protecting, water systems, watersheds, and just positive ecological outcomes, so on and so forth. All of these organic standards have been codified in the National Organic Program's written regulations. So what's the purpose of it? For many farmers, it can mean all sorts of different things, whether it's accessing markets, getting a little bit off of the, input treadmill. Um, I know that, like, for instance, the farm that I worked for in Montana, my boss, the farm manager, um, he just had a very strong conviction that input-based agriculture had no future. And when you look at like the global landscape of, the energy markets, the fertilizer markets, now more than ever, we sort of realize how fragile and brittle those supply chains really are. And so like organic agriculture, particularly in grain production, can really benefit from just sidestepping that fragility and instead relying on like real ecological based, holistic management of your farm ecosystem. So not only is it a financial boon that you get a higher price for your product, but you also pay less for the inputs coming into the farm, and the production of that crop ends up being healthier both for you, the farmer, and for the eater, because neither of you are handling toxic synthetic chemicals that, we we're becoming more and more aware of how they negatively affect our bodies. So anyway, that's sort of like what the organic movement has always been about. And what certification does is it overlays those principles with a very rigorous framework. So to become a certified organic crop producer, it's somewhat simple. What you do is you apply to become certified. MOFGA Certification Services, our website, we have an online portal what you can log into and fill out a series of questions about what your farming practices are. What this does is it sets up your organic system plan. That application gets sent to our specialists who then review it. And we look for details. We look to see how are you managing your, your land, your soil, your water. What resources are you using? What resources are you protecting? And how are you keeping synthetic and other prohibited practices from interacting with your farm? So we'll look at all of those details. And then once we have filled out that application process, we'll send it out to an inspector who will come to your farm and will verify that what you say you are doing is actually what you are doing. After that, the inspector will write a report, submit it back to your specialist, who will review it, look for compliance. If we see compliance, then we issue certification. So that certification decision then allows you to market your products as certified organic products. That process repeats annually, year in and year out. This is the relationship that you will build with your certifier. So it sort of looks like this. This is taken directly from our producer practice manual. So anyone who is interested in looking into certification, the MCS website has a download link for an extremely detailed and extensive document called our producer practice manual, which outlines all of the regulations themselves and then the best practices for how you can comply with these regulations as a crop farmer. But essentially, what certification ends up being is just a cycle of annual review, inspection, and renewal of your product to be an annual crop farmer, or sorry, a certified organic crop farmer. I think for a lot of people, it sounds more complicated than it really is. And luckily for an organic grain operation, a grain farm can like essentially be one of the simplest forms of a farm for certification. And so I'll just sort of walk you through what that might look like. So the first thing that you'll do is you'll come up with your organic system plan. And essentially, if we look at certification, what we're certifying is a farm's process. We're not certifying your product. It would be unreasonable for us to test every single tomato, cucumber, bushel of wheat or whatever for pesticide residue. So that's not something that the USDA or organic certification is able to achieve or is even trying to achieve. Instead, we are certifying your process. And so what that means is that you submit a plan for how you will keep your crop, how you'll produce your crop organically, and how you will maintain that crop's organic integrity as you manage it through the marketplace. And so that system of management we refer to as your organic system plan. This plan follows, how you purchase your seed, how you plant your seed, how you cultivate that seed, how you harvest that into a crop, and then how you sell that. Everything that you as a farm operation touch needs to be verifiably protected. So by your organic system plan. So the way in which that we audit your plan is sometimes we'll take crop samples for sure, but the most important thing that we can do is audit how you're actively managing that crop. So the only way that you can prove to us that you're managing it is by having records and systems in place that demonstrate that compliance. So a big part of the inspection process and the certification process is demonstrating through your records that the plan that you submitted to us is actually what you're doing at your farm. And the way that we prove that is by looking at your records, auditing those records, and then that demonstrates to us that you're doing everything in your power as a crop producer to keep your your land and system managed to the regulations. So this is taken directly from the National Organic Program rule. This is about record keeping. The highlights here that I just want to point out are that records must concern, you have to maintain records concerning the production, the harvesting, and the sale of organic products. these records can be adapted to the particular business. So in other words, every single farm's records are going to look very different because every single farm is very different. Um, Essentially, what your records need to demonstrate is how you are managing the integrity of that crop from purchasing the seed to selling the product. So when I was working out in Montana, I worked for a very large, extremely complicated organic crop operation. We harvested, or sorry, we managed 13,000 acres of production. Each year we planted probably about, 7 to 8,000 acres of that, whereas the rest was in either a cover crop cycle or in a, permanent perennial habitat or something like that. So on the screen here, this is actually a screenshot from a Google Maps image of one of the fields that we managed. And you could actually see, on Google Maps from space. This is out in Montana, they divide their land into what they call sections. So 1 square mile by 1 square mile. This was one of the sections that we managed. This is field 22 on our crop plan. And you can see these strips running vertically north to south. Um, each one of those is one of our crop strips that we managed. And if you look on the right side of this presentation, you'll see a map depicting exactly what this looked like in our record keeping system. So this is a pretty clear example of how a record should definitely and like directly translate the reality of what's happening. So I think this is like a pretty stark and significant example. If a satellite from space is showing what's on the left side of the screen and our record is on the right side, there's a very significant correlation between the two. So that's what a record is meant to do. It's meant to demonstrate this compliance and this accurate depiction of how you are managing your land. So for Villicus Farms, we were managing a very complex, expansive, we had 4 different farm units. It was 23 miles from north to south. We had names for each of the units. This is from the Cottonwood unit. On each farm unit, we were cultivating upwards of like 11 to 12 crops per year. Um, we were doing winter wheats, spring wheats, pulse crops such as lentils and peas, um, a lot of different varieties, some broadleaf, buckwheat, things like that, winter rye, all sorts of things were going on. And so we needed to track each and every single one of those crops from the source of seed to the end sale, which ended up generating quite a lot of paperwork. So not every farm is going to be this complex. A lot of grain farms are actually just doing maybe 1, 2, 3, or 4 different crops at a time on a much smaller land base. And so your record keeping systems need to be sort of tuned to what you're actually doing. Um, Fortunately for me, I was able to learn like the most complicated system on the largest size and see what that looked like in reality. And we were certified organic and we were inspected each year. And I was a part of those inspection processes. And while they were rigorous, the practices that we had in place were able to meet those regulations. And we maintained certification for each year that I was there. So I just want to highlight on the map, the previous slide, if you look, you zoom in, each one of these crop strips also incorporates a field history. The buffers on the sides of the map are noted, which show to our certifying agency that the surrounding acreage, which was not managed organically and actually had quite a bit of conventional agriculture occurring, we showed that we were protecting the crops that we were cultivating by establishing extensive buffers. We also demonstrated through these records that we had a quite, complex cropping system, utilizing green manures, utilizing cover crops, and utilizing several different families of crops to have a crop rotation that managed our soil health, quite effectively. On these, you'll also notice that we have the acreage noted. Um, for instance, on certain of these crop strips, there's actually a date below the crop type. So on this image, that 12N RWW stands for red winter wheat. It was planted September 23rd of the previous year. So we already have a planting date on this map. And that's sort of just an example of how you can demonstrate through record keeping, hey, like not only is this a record of what we did last year, but it's a plan for this season. And also, here's the several year history of this field before this red winter wheat was planted. We can show what's occurred here for the last 5 years, essentially. So I just wanted to like highlight this as like a really excellent example of what a farm map can look like. Not only is it including what the acreage is, how it's being managed, but it also includes the dates crops were planted and what was planted for several years prior. And that complexity of record keeping is something that just really shows the thoughtfulness that you're putting into your farm plan, and that will lead to like great results at an organic inspection. So on top of just being able to show what you're farming, where you're farming, and what it's surrounded by, you'll also want to create records that document your field activities. So for a grain farm, this can actually be quite simple. You are, purchasing seed, you're planting that seed, you're harvesting it, you're storing it, and then you're selling it. So that's like 5 separate events that you would just need to have noted. If you are applying or purchasing inputs such as fertilizer, manure, things like that, we would also want to see records of that. For managing that grain, once you take it off of the field, where are you storing it and how are you getting it to that storage? So for a fully certified organic operation that is only handling organic crops, this can be extremely simple. The only records you need to say are how much you harvested off of what field and what, bin or wagon or, tote it went into. Um, so it's very simple when you're certified organic 100%. Once you are an operation that's actually managing conventional or even transitioning crops into production, which is sort of what we did. We were always adding organic acreage to the farm, and so we were constantly managing what we would consider parallel production, meaning that some of our acreage was fully certified, some of our acreage was heading towards certification. Um, in other words, it was going through a transition period where no prohibited substances were being applied, but it hadn't yet passed through that window, which is a 3-season or 3-year window for a piece of ground to be considered organic. For those kinds of operations that are handling organic and non-organic crops, your handling and storage records are super important because what we need to understand is how you are keeping those streams from commingling or contaminating each other. Ways in which that we would show this to our certifier is anytime that we handled a conventional crop, a non-certified crop with a piece of equipment, whether that was a combine, a truck, an auger, a storage bin, anything like that, we always had a clean out record before an organic crop was used again with that piece of equipment. So that might look like having a purge record for your augers. So if I take a conventional crop off of a field, I put it into a truck, I bring it to my storage site, I then auger that crop into the bin that I'm going to store that conventional crop in. The auger that I used to handle that crop, the truck that I used to transport that crop, and the combine that I used to harvest that crop will all need to go through some sort of a clean or purge before handling an organic crop. That could look like, compressed air, sweeping. It doesn't have to be, you're not getting in there with you know, bleach and a toothbrush. But what you do want to say is, look, I did what I could to make sure that whatever crop I handled with this equipment, there was no residues left that could contaminate the organic crop that I then went and harvested. And that's something that we paid very, very close attention to and was super important for our record keeping because every year we were adding acreage onto our organic land, and we didn't want to risk or jeopardize the organic integrity of the crops that we were harvesting that were already certified. So as you can see, this is sort of what I was just talking about. You need to demonstrate with records that you have a system in place where those separate streams in parallel production are kept totally distinct, and that any equipment or storage capacity that you're using to manage both of those streams have some kind of a recorded system in place for how you are maintaining that integrity. So for us, I will just say we each truck that we harvested, or rather that we transported crops with, and at each bin site, we had notebooks and checklists just to say that, yes, we did clean this piece of equipment before handling an organic crop. So, like I said, you don't need bleach and a toothbrush, and it doesn't need to be super complicated, but you do just want to show I've got a system in place, and every time that I come into contact with what we would consider like a critical point, I'm taking care of the organic integrity of my crop. So for instance, this is one of the ways that we just made it super easy for us. Like um, record keeping can be like overwhelming, it can be complicated, but it doesn't actually have to be. So the way in which we tried to make it simple was in every single piece of equipment, every single truck, we had a little book. And in that book, um, we would list out what were the important things for that record to track. So for instance, this is like the book that would travel in the combine. Inside that combine book, we would have an area for, the date of the operation, the name of the operator, what farm unit that we were operating in, the field number that operation was occurring, the crop strip that we were harvesting from, the identity of the crop, the total acreage of the activity, and then in this instance, because this was a combine book, um, how many bushels were unloaded. And then we would have a yield calculation based off of that. And then in our notes section, we would actually note what storage vessel that combine unloaded into. So we essentially had from the point of planting, we would have a planting record with a book just like this in our seeding tractor that would say the exact same thing. So we would have a seeding record, a harvest record, the truck that the crop was harvested into would have an unload record at the bin site that it was unloaded into, and what bin that went into. So we would be able to know based on these records exactly uh, not only what the bins were holding, but exactly what crop type, what strip, what field, who operated that combine, who drove that truck. It was incredibly traceable. And at the end of the year, the farm manager would go through and, you know, compile all of these records into a master document where each and every single crop was tracked all the way from the seeding instance to the harvest instance to the storage of that particular bin. That it sounds like an incredible amount of record keeping and it sounds really complicated, but essentially in practice it was super easy. All you had to do is explain to everybody who worked at the farm, here's the book that's in this tractor. Here's the book that's in this truck. Here's the book that's in this combine. Just fill it out when you're doing the activity on the farm. What it accumulated to was a really granular overview of what happened at this 13,000 acre farm, but in practice it was actually pretty easy. So that's sort of the point I want to make here is that you don't have to think too hard. You just have to, come up with a system and then make enforcing that system quite easy by giving yourself tools to do that. So why were we doing all this record keeping? The reason we're doing all this record keeping is because every year we're going to have an organic inspection where these records are going to be asked for, and there's going to be two exercises that are performed on our record keeping practices. Those are called the mass balance and the traceback. A mass balance is basically just a justification of the sales that the operation made with the production records of the farm. What we want to know is, did you actually produce enough of this crop to justify your sales records? So for instance, if you sold 6 tons of oats, show us where you grew 6 tons of oats. In that instance, what we're going to be looking at is inventory records and harvest records. For our traceback audit, what we want to know is, while this crop was under your control, did you maintain organic integrity as it moved through your farm system? For a grain farm, that's quite easy. What you're going to show is that you bought an organic seed, you planted it on organic land, and then you harvested an organic crop and then sold it. And so what that means is we want to see invoices of your seed purchase. We want to see planting records. We want to see harvest records. And then we want to see storage and sales records that track that crop through your system. So these are taken directly from our own inspection forms. This is what a mass balance might look like. As you can see, we're looking at the beginning inventory and then what was harvested or produced on the farm so that we know exactly how much you had in total on your farm system. And then we'd look at your sales records. How much did you sell over the same time period? And then we'll take the difference between those two and come up with a variance between what you sold, what you produced, and whether there was a discrepancy in those records. So the important thing to note for a grain farm is that knowing your inventory of your crop and then knowing the total amount that you've harvested of that crop are going to be extremely important in order to justify your sales records to your inspector. For our traceback, we'll basically look at a sale. So we'd say, hey, what was the most recent sale you made? From that sale, can we trace back through your production system, when was it harvested? When was it planted? And then when was that seed originally purchased? That shows us that what's coming off of your farm that is being sold into the marketplace as organic originated as an organic input into your farm system. So essentially, one of the most important things that you can do as a grain farmer is to just absolutely know like what your storage quantities are and what's in those storage vessels. So on this slide, I just show like, if you own a grain bin, a lot of the times the manufacturer will have a detailed breakdown exactly of what that vessel is capable of storing in volume. Knowing that and being able to show that to your inspector and certifier, super important, because you will be able to say, this is how much crop is in this bin, and I know that it's this much because this is how full it is at this point in time. So we want to know, your total capacity. We want to know what the is in storage at any given moment. And it's up to the farm operator to know and like take those inventories and do that in a reasonable way. But we just, the point that I want to make here is that like knowing how much crop you have on hand and how much crop you produced and how much crop is in storage is going to make all of these audits be super easy. Every farm is different. We were lucky to have, I don't know, I think we had 35 different hopper bottom bins, but some people are storing crop in, these ag bags or gravity wagons, or even just in the truck that they were able to harvest it into. So you just really need to know what your storage system is and then figure out and calculate, the amount that you have on hand and be able to demonstrate that in your record keeping. Um, I would say like when it comes to a grain farm, that's like essential to certification because from our point of view as an organic certifier, an organic crop on the market is going to be more valuable than a non-organic crop. And that additional value essentially means that there's a motivation on producers um, to potentially commit fraud to achieve that higher value without going through the work that we ask our organic producers to do. So the easiest thing to do in the grain economy is to fraudulently introduce grain to the marketplace. So, you know, how do we look at fraud? Well, the way we look at fraud is we should know how through your sales records, if you sold, you know, $2 million worth of grain into the marketplace, we want to see $2 million of grain produced on your farm. Um, if we can't figure out through your record keeping and your storage capacity, your productive capacity, all those things, if we can't prove that you produced and harvested $2 million worth of grain, well, then where did that difference come from? And in the organic grain world, that's sort of the biggest risk to the marketplace is a truck of organic wheat looks just like a truck of conventional wheat. And so it's extremely important to, you know, to meet the organic standard and not be run the risk of appearing to commit fraud, whether it's intentional or accidental. You need to be able to check all these boxes and be able to show that this is true, and you can trust that this was the production, the transport, and the storage from seed to harvest of these crops. So the good news is that there's like tons of people who can help you do this. MOFGA, obviously, we're always available. We've got our website that not only has just a bunch of information on, cropping systems, the technical aspects of farming organically, but also we have a bunch of record keeping templates that you can use. And then on top of that, in the grain world, there's just quite a bit of software out there that makes tracking and doing these kinds of record keeping endeavors super easy. So on the farm that I worked at in Montana, we actually had a software app. I can't remember the name of it. I want to say it was called Farmhand, that we could actually input each and every single one of our fields, our bin sites, the capacities of each of our bin, and then anytime someone unloaded a crop, we were able to type that into the app. So we always had a running total of what each individual bin had. So there's just an incredible amount of tools out there for people to use. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I definitely encourage everyone to just go see what's out there. For instance, a quick Google search for me before even putting together this slideshow, there's an app called Bin Store that I was looking at that looks exactly like what we used. Um, that just makes these sort of record keeping. And not only are you tracking inventory through things like this, but you can actually input your farm fields, you can name different areas, you can come up with field histories, and so on and so forth. So there's just a lot of work being done out there to make this kind of record keeping for certification super easy and accessible. And I will just say, just speaking from personal experience from out in Montana and working as like, a big primary part of my job was doing a lot of the grain handling. driving trucks around, unloading bins, uh, getting crop ready for sale, and loading trucks when they came to pick up crop. Um, Having all those notebooks in the tractors, combines, and trucks, it just you get a sense of peace as an operator, just knowing that everything you're doing is getting written down, and that when that annual audit comes around and you have your inspector show up on site, you've generated a lot of proof for what you're doing, how you're managing it, and that the crop that you are entering into the marketplace can be like a trusted organic crop. And that's really what MCS is here to do, is to sort of help and support you on this journey into like getting transitioning, cultivating your farm, and then getting a crop into the organic marketplace, and hopefully getting a higher dollar value out of it at the end of the day. And that's all I got.
That was so great, Benjamin. I keep every time you mention something else, I keep thinking about some other question that I have just on a personal level. Bin store that you just mentioned, I also was looking it up as you were talking about it. It looks like it's free also, which is wild.
Currently. We'll see how long that lasts.
Yeah, it says currently free. They have plans to make it paid in the future, but it's got a lot of functionality, it looks like, and it'd be an interesting tool for people to use. I have a question about seed that's saved from year to year versus, so how much of the seed were you regrowing from what was grown a previous year? How is that handled and stored? Is there tracking additionally on that side of things?
Yeah, yeah. So we purchased a lot of seed, but we also did save a lot of seed. Um, at the scale that we were at, I will just say we were not purchasing organic seed. There was no quantity of organic seed available commercially that we could find. And so our certifier exempted us from the organic seed requirement, in order to plant thousands of acres of grain, that there just wasn't enough organically grown seed on the marketplace. And so we endeavored to actually save a lot of our own seed. And one of the projects that I took on while I was there was we experimented with like essentially creating our own proprietary seed blend, where we actually we purchased three different lots of seed. We blended it all together, and then we grew it out sort of as like our own artificial landrace, if you will.
Hmm.
And then we saved seed from that crop each year to replant. The way in which that all of that seed was just harvested into a bin as one giant lot, and it came from many different fields. And then over the winter, I actually cleaned that seed, and in that cleaning process, we were high grading it with a special, a gravity air cleaner, that we were taking the largest kernels from that crop, and then diverting that to our own seed stock, and then replanting that every year. And so the the way in which we recorded that was we just recorded how much seed we cleaned out of that lot. And so that never went into the marketplace as an organic crop. It was just saved for us. And then when essentially we would have a cleaning record, and that cleaning record showed our certifier the origin of our seed the following year. We would say, oh, where did that seed come from? Oh, we cleaned it out of this harvest. Here's how much we cleaned. This is the bin it went into. And then we reseeded that the next year, and then wash, rinse, repeat, do that again the next year. We also did that for a few other crops. I think we cleaned, it was primarily different wheat crops that we would clean seed from.
Huh. Interesting.
Julie, it looks like you got a question.
Yeah, no, actually, I just wanted to further um, follow up on your response and Tristan's question, which one thing that I've seen some producers do is actually just the seed that they're going to replant recorded as a sale to themselves. So it sort of gets seen and accounted for in their sales records.
Hmm.
So that's just something else I've seen them do.
How about from a that's interesting. How about from like a fertility standpoint? What did that look like on a scale of this size, and how was that logged and tracked? I'm assuming, and obviously it's had in this within the same systems of field histories and whatnot and applications, but um, what kinds of inputs were you using at that scale?
Yeah. So I think primarily we predicated our fertility on like green manures. So there was a specific year in the crop rotation where we would plant what we would consider a green manure fallow crop. That would be something like chickling vetch was a very popular one for us. Chickling vetch has the ability to fix nitrogen at a quantity far greater than most other legumes. And so that was a huge benefit to us. We also used forage crops where we would plant a forage across the soil and get a little extra nutrition from that animal manure. And then there were three neighboring operations that were running cattle. And in the winter, they would bring their cattle off of the range into like a holding area. Um, and each year, we had an agreement with them to come in with a payloader and scrape out their beef feedlot manure. Um, I will just point out that beef feedlot manure, they were not certified organic animals, but that does not matter. For from manure purposes, it does not need to come from a certified source. Manure is manure is manure as long as it hasn't been treated after the fact with any, you know, products that would, essentially kill flies or something like that. So we would scrape out these conventional feedlots and put that through a manure spreader and apply that to different crop strips each year. And just as with the other record keeping, that was, the tractor that ran that manure spreader would have a line in their tractor record keeping book in their field activity log that I spread this crop strip. This is how many loads that were spread on it. And in that sense, we were able to track fertility applications throughout the farm.
Hmm.
We also did a lot of, we started on-farm composting. So we would take that manure, we would windrow it, and we would use a uh, a windrow compost turn or manure turner, compost turner, and then would apply that as well. But those were our only two sources of fertility. It was either beef feedlot manure or a green manure cropping strategy.
I was it yellow did the is the YP was that yellow peas? Was that what was on
Yep,
there?
that's yellow peas, and that was actually a cash crop. That is not a green manure crop.
Interesting. That's always a question mark in Maine around where can we find good markets for yellow peas and marketable products as well. That's interesting.
Yeah, so our cash or sorry, our market for yellow peas was actually uh it wasn't actually, it was the precursor company to Cliff Bar. So
Hmm.
essentially there was a company out in Wisconsin or Minnesota that was a pea protein isolate company,
Hmm.
and they process the peas into pea protein and then sell it to Cliff Bar.
Hmm. Interesting.
It was actually a pretty good contract. They would provide the seed and they paid for delivery of the seed and they paid for trucking to their processing plant. The company is called Puris, Puris.
Hmm. Interesting. So
Yeah, I mean,
interesting.
I'll just say like this was a it was the area that we were farming was dry land, very arid, extremely difficult place to farm. and maybe in the future shouldn't be farmed as climate change continues to sort of shift. But I will say, out of all of the farm systems that I've worked within, um, I really admired the strategy behind what our operation was engaged in. Um, you know, Doug and Anna are very visionary, and they wanted to have the largest organic grain farm in Montana.
Mhm.
They really want to transform what agriculture looks like out there. And I guess I just kind of want to say this. The area that we were farming in was completely surrounded by conventional chemical wheat production systems. So any single piece of land that we weren't actively farming was being farmed in a way that was very chemical intense. Um, they were applying synthetic nitrogen. They were doing all sorts of crop protection with all sorts of sprayers and products like that.
Mhm.
And so it was really important for us as a farm to maintain that integrity of our organic system. We had extensive buffers around each and every single one of our fields. And if there ever was a spray event where there was chemical drift, we had to report that. So fortunately, the way in which we established our buffers and the way in which we managed those neighboring lands, we never had a spray event that was significant enough, for us to actually need to go and report that to our certifier. Um, and that was very intentional, is that we wanted these extensive buffers that would keep the production that we were doing protected from the chemical nature of our neighboring producers.
Yeah.
And I will just say we were very friendly with them. There was no real animosity. We were very friendly with our neighbors, um, but we definitely protected those fence rows.
Hmm. Interesting. Is there anything about Montana specifically that helped to drive the Montana organic grain market? Is it, these entrepreneurs that you worked for specifically? It's interesting because if you travel to like New York City and you talk with some of the large bakeries in New York City, they're using Montana organic grains a lot of times. And I'm wondering if you know of anything about the kind of history of how that came to be, or if it's just that the scale of operations and the way that they're reaching markets was particularly effective.
I think the number one thing I'll say around that is that this area in Montana is ideally suited for bred wheat.
Hmm.
This is right on the edge of the Golden Triangle, which is a 100 mile by 100 mile by 100 mile sort of triangle up in the northern plains of Montana, to the east of Glacier National Park there, where they have the perfect conditions for that high protein wheat. They have cold nights, warm days, and incredibly cold winters that basically kill off any diseases in the soil. Um, and so those sort of intense growing conditions end up leading to a basically a stress response in the wheat plant that increases that nitrogen number,
Hmm.
which is that protein content. So it's no secret that Montana is mecca for wheat bread, production. Um, in this area in particular, what really transformed the organic landscape, um, it's quite recent. There's a company out there, Timeless Seeds. There's actually a very good book written about this called The Lentil Underground.
Oh yeah, I've
This
heard.
is
I know that.
Yeah, and this is actually how I found this farm. Was I read this book, a decade or whatever ago,
Yeah.
and I got very interested in what they were doing. And I guess I would say like the motivation behind it was these rising fertilizer costs, rising, the cost of these inputs. This is such an agriculturally dependent economy out there, and just trying to figure out how to make a better dollar off of your acre is like hugely important to like keeping these lands productive. And what they realized was that through green manure cover crops, they were able to achieve sufficient yields with reduced overhead and produce a higher value crop on the other end. And once they started going, oh, wait, we can actually grow really high value crops with very little overhead if we just manage our land differently, all we need to do is diversify. And so that sort of caught on, and there's a whole enclave of producers up here in this region. There was the Manuels um, south of town that we actually worked closely with, Doug and Anna for on Villicus Farms, but they all know each other. I will just say, like, the Montana organic community is very, very close knit, and very, very passionate. Um, and very successful. I think that a lot of these farms that are growing organically, you know, it's a struggle every year, but the one thing that they don't have to worry about is the cost of anhydrous ammonia. They don't have to worry about, these other skyrocketing costs that these conventional producers are going through. And so I think that was sort of like, I will say, I think economically was like the original motivating factor behind that adoption. And then ecologically, they saw such a difference in their landscapes and just kept with it. Um, I will say, like, yeah, so the Lentil Underground and then Bob Quinn's book, Grain by Grain,
Hmm.
uh, are both just excellent resources if you want to learn a little bit more about, organic um, farming out in the plains of Montana.
Fascinating stuff, Benjamin. This has been so great. Um, does anyone else have any other questions? We're going to make sure that we share this video far and wide. We'll post it to our site, and we have a dedicated page on our Grain Expert Office Hour um, site page, landing page, so that we'll get that out into the world. But I want to thank you so much, Benjamin, also for taking the time and sharing your expertise. I know I've got to Benjamin joined our board maybe I don't know how long ago now, 6 months ago, maybe more
It was
than
like
that.
last June, I think,
Yeah.
maybe.
And I've been able to pick his brain and learn so much from his experiences, and really appreciate for you to take the time and for us all to continue to help to champion increased acreage in Maine around organic.
Tristan, before we go, I'm
Yeah.
just curious, what is the demand for organic grain in Maine right now?
Well, it's a really timely question because there's a history of desire for organic grain to be grown in larger quantities, especially in Aroostook County. And about 15 years ago, there was a group that was um, sort of a loosely affiliated group of some large organic food businesses that were hoping to see a Aroostook lead in the Northeast around organic grains. And it fostered a whole series of conversations with the Sustainability Lab from Vermont. Organic Valley and Stonyfield were part of those conversations early on. And it brought together a group of farmers, potato growers, and other folks who were specializing in grain growing even at that time, but largely serving commodities markets and feed markets. But the timing wasn't right. There wasn't yet enough understanding of where I think the sort of movement was going, what the businesses needed. They were at a place where they needed something a little different than what the infrastructure allowed for. There wasn't local processing yet as well or as much, especially in way of post-harvest grain handling capabilities. So a lot of farms could grow. They had a combine, but they didn't have drying, cleaning, sorting, storage facilities. And So farmers were sort of reticent. My understanding in talking to folks who were part of those conversations more than I was is that they weren't ready to yet like bear the risk of taking on that those added costs with not completely clear understanding of what the volume would look like, what the relationships would be. And there's a, as in anything, there's some history around other new ideas of new introduction of crops or rotations that haven't panned out the way that they might have. And I think some of that has been carried forward. But all that to say that in the last 15 years, a lot of things have changed. We've proven out a lot of great markets, especially for organic grains in the bread space. So, Main Grains and Aurora Mills. Aurora Mills is the largest organic grain grower and is one of the largest grain growers in the state in general, and is sourcing from others as well to help meet their demand. But those have come online and really proven out markets that are both inside the state and outside the state. At the same time, the malt houses have come into great success, having been able to provide a large volume, millions of pounds annually, to the breweries. Now, there's not very much organic pressure in the brewing space because there's only, a very small number of organic breweries. Sasano Brewing is one, Peak Organic is another. But there is desire from the malt houses to include organic grains in their malting, and especially when it can make sense as part of like a specialty offering. And so farms were able to, with the combination of the bread and beer, were able to increase their post-harvest grain handling capacities. And larger growers, potato growers specifically, instead of seeing grain as a way to get back to potatoes and sort of thinking about it from a soil health or pest mitigation standpoint, they're recognizing the opportunity and so have, had conversations with the mills and malt houses a lot more around, well, what if we move some of this outside of what we typically do to some of these more value added, within the value chain markets. And I was at an event at Allagash Brewing Company in the fall, and it was a group. Whole Foods delegation actually led it. The CEO of Whole Foods was moderating a panel that I was one of the panelists with Jason Perkins and Pete and Jerry's Eggs and Stonyfield. And again, like there's still desire for that to happen, and so we have better capabilities now. And so maybe it's the timing is better for us to restart some of those conversations again because there's a good track record of how we can make it work at scale. Especially if you look at Allagash as an example of how it worked, not in the organic space, but in a grain planning standpoint, where they said they were using about 60,000 pounds of local grains, mostly malt barley, in 2017. And they said over the course of the next 5 years, by the fifth year, we'll be sourcing 1 million pounds annually. And what that allowed for was for those farms to put in the needed planning and infrastructure, bins, all the things that needed to happen to get to that number while feeling secure and confident that they would have a market to be able to sell at a price that was going to work. And so if you follow that model, I think, and look at some tangible ways that that might be able to be executed as like sort of a bright spot, I think there's a good chance that we could see some organic grain acreage expand. And what we have seen is some of it be reduced, unfortunately, right, in the last number of years. And that's affected by the fact that we don't have a huge number of farms. And the ones that we do, if we have a larger farm that goes offline or retires or moves into something else, that can substantially affect the organic acreage. So there's a there's some kind of arms need to get around this all and then get each other in the room together again, I think, and revisit and see whether that's a potential market pathway.
Yeah, and I would love to just see, you know, Stonyfield and Organic Valley step into the animal feed grain as like a stepping stone for farmers. You don't have to hit the same quality metrics. There's a guaranteed market animals are going to eat every year. Like um, I really think that for the acreage to expand, the the um, the market needs to multiply into these other, and diversity is the key to success, is what it ends up being. Even on a grain farm, at the microcosm, the only reason that Villicus Farms was able to survive every year was because when one crop failed, another crop did well,
Yeah.
and having 13 to 20 crops each season is how you know justify, or rather handle those variations. So
Yeah, the
that's what I would like to
tertiary
see.
those tertiary markets are like essential. And so we end up talking a lot about like, food grade grains or malt grade grains, but the truth is that, the vast majority of grain that's grown is grown for commodity or for feed, or not done anything with in some cases. And so there's a real opportunity for us to look at not necessarily needing to expand acreage, but to change the what those acres are doing. Um, and that's exciting, I think. And I think that there's a more of a willingness to engage in those conversations than there was before, and on all ends of the spectrum. I think that it has to be the right timing, and it needs to be the right sort of uh, all the right conversations being done in the right ways. But I one of the benefits of shooting for these higher grade varieties like a malt grade barley or a high quality milling grain is that when you miss those specs or standards, that you land in a much better place from a feed market too. You have really high quality feed, and that's super, super important to the grain economy overall. So, um, lots of work
Yeah.
still to be done, but it's an exciting time, I think, for organic grains. There's a desire, there's opportunity, there's market, and so we want to help to kind of foster that.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I would say just on like the why organic is when you look at the input cost on a farm's balance sheet, it's just going one direction. Every single year, the fertilizer goes up, the fuel goes up, even like the specialty seed goes up. They're trying to, you know, GMO wheat is coming in, now. And the treadmill of those inputs is strangling farms all over this country. And the organic value proposition is you don't need any of that. You just need to think about your farm differently. And I really, really strongly believe that that's the more sustainable future that we all really want to live in.
That's a pretty beautiful way to end that. Do you have a question?
I do. Of course, Benjamin is always eloquent and
He
smart as
is.
a whip, and you're lucky you got him on your grain board.
I totally agree.
Where's the railroad? Let's say you really get an industry growing and you get crops and you get that abundance because it's not just Maine who's so bottlenecked and choked out and financially crippled by the cost of grain and organic dairy. And I know Vermont's got its thing, and I'm old enough to have remembered some of these grain world visions of the past that didn't
Mhm.
quite come to fruition. But in all these plans, is the railroad still thought someday to become a viable part of the I mean, like if you get the industry going?
Yeah, it's a very expensive proposition to update. Unfortunately, my understanding is that the rail lines have become very, very slow. There's been basically like the station depots are more and more challenging to use. The irony is that the East-West Railway to Canada is in better shape than the North-South, which would serve, you know, all points south from Aroostook County. Um, I know that I do think, like anything, investment in infrastructure is pretty critical to see some of the market expansion. In the past, there were some large businesses that were exploring, especially around use of the former Loring Air Force Base, like reinstituting some of the rail that once existed there and connecting it to the faster speed rail now that I think Presque Isle is sort of like the northern terminus of. Caribou used to have it also, but it really has slowed down. I'm not sure what is coming in and out at this point into Caribou. Um, so it's interesting. It's an interesting conversation point, and I think it would take some time, and it would need to take some. That's a long-term strategy, from my understanding of from how viable it can be.
I'm sure it is. And I apologize. I was off today and then I came in and I realized I'm Laura Brown. I work with Benjamin. I work in livestock and dairy, so I don't have a name on there.
That's all
But
right.
I did make it, Benjamin. So the other thing that's just got my goat about grain is that I'm not far north of what was Blue Seal Feeds drop off from the and now they're shipping in the grain,
Yep.
conventional grain, and they're filling the silos that the railroads used to fill. So it's just I keep just seeing everything implode, and I
There's there's some interesting things, you bring up the mill side for feed. There's a group of farmers, is some blending and milling that's happening for livestock inside the state. And there's more opportunity around that, although it's can get quite complicated pretty fast, I think, from my understanding, my layman's understanding of how it works. But was a group of farmers, especially in the Holton area, that was even brought it to like an emergency resolution with the Maine Farm Bureau one year around how frustrated they were that they were raising grain on their farm, sending it to New Brunswick, having it milled, and then purchasing it back. And so they wanted to explore like whether, some kind of milling facility specifically for feed purpose could be done. And there is some entrepreneurs who are tackling some of that. Um, but it is, that is another, I think what the Maine Grain Alliance is sort of excited about is helping to steward some of those conversations with people, connect the success stories, help build upon, some of the processing, capabilities that have happened, in the last decade. And who's to say that next entrepreneur isn't going to be able to come through and, help to take this next section. Once we alleviate one of these bottlenecks that's kind of holding things back, there's always something else just behind it, right? And we have a lot of bottlenecks to alleviate to get to where we want to get to, but there's a lot of advantages that we have too. And I think that's sort of a very exciting place to live, is that we have a lot of acres. I mean, relative to the rest of New England. We have farmers with a lot of great acumen, both organically and conventionally. And there's an interest and willingness to explore new markets like there weren't before. So, and success stories in the processing middle of the value chain, that also wasn't there before. So, if you look at beer as that another piece, it's fascinating because there's very few agricultural industries in the state where you can grow the crop on a farm, sell it to a processor that's a business that's inside of the state, and then they sell all of their product to other businesses that are inside of the state and still not reach the market demand. And that's pretty unique. There's not that many other agricultural industries that are like that. I always think about like my grandfather was, and both my grandparents were potato farmers. There's a lot of people from Aroostook County. But he grew for the Piggly Wiggly, and he would load it in rail cars, which was, the rail cars were good then, and he'd send them off to Georgia or wherever Piggly Wigglies were. He never went to a Piggly Wiggly in his life, and potatoes are moved all over. But that's this grain space is an interesting one where there are some real opportunities in the regional food system for us to serve greater numbers of people. I mean, I would argue that we have a lot greater opportunity in potatoes as well to serve regionally. But in any event, yeah, it's an interesting observation.
thank you.
Well, this has been a fun conversation, and it won't have to stop here. We will continue our next organic grain expert office hour is going to take place on the at the end of the month. Is it the 31st?
31st. No.
And we have Tom Malloy from the University of Maine Cooperative Extension who's going to be joining us. And Tom is always filled with lots of great information. We'll learn more about what's happening on Rogers Farm and their trialing efforts. And we'll also visit Rogers Farm later in the year for a field tour in July. I think it's July 7th, if anybody's available. In the meantime, we'll keep everyone up to date on a whole series of events that we have going on. And if you can, sign up to come to the Organic Grain and Seed Summit, which is happening at in Skowhegan and in Hinckley at Kennebec Valley Community College and the Alphon campus on April 17th and 18th. It's free, and would highly encourage anybody who's able to make it to come. We'll have Friday night well, on Friday we'll have a workshop on nixtamalization and with actually led by our keynote presenter Rafael Meyer, who is leads an organization in Mexico who's been safeguarding and restoring hundreds of varieties of Mexican flint corns. He will be the keynote the following day. We'll have a mill tour and a whole series of 6 or 7 different workshops on Saturday, all day fun, and a seed swap as well. So if you can make it, join us. And until then, thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Awesome.